Hey, it's Drybear. We're continuing our series of covering every spec in every piece of content in Dragonflight, and today we're going to talk about how to play Restoration Druid in Raid. I'll give you some talent builds down below in the description that you can copy and import directly into your game. You have it instantly in your game itself, and then we'll talk about how to play it, why the talent builds are important, and what to look out for. As always, if you have any questions or comments for me, you'll find me live every day on twitch.tv/Drybear. Come by and say hi. All right, let's talk Restoration Druid in Raid. If you missed my Mythic Plus guide for Resto Druid, I have that link down below in the description. You can find it on my channel as well. It changes up the build and how the character plays for Mythic Plus in 5-man dungeons, but this will be going over how to play it in a Raid setting, specifically Vault of the Incarnates. But first, let's go over a quick overview of the class so you know how Restoration Druid works. Resto Druid is the pinnacle of heal over time effects. There isn't a single healer that has more heal over time than the Restoration Druid. So rather than having a lot of upfront heals, the Resto Druid does more delayed heal over time effects and has ways to amplify that. Your heals are Rejuvenation, which is a single target heal you can cast on the target. If you have Rejuve twice, then you can also do an extra bit with Germination, which is a smaller version of Rejuve. You also have one of the best heals in your kit, Life Bloom, on top of Efflorescence, which is a pulse on the ground. If you run Spring Blossoms here, you make it so people standing in your Efflorescence get another hot on them, which does trigger your Mastery, which is super nice. It means that for every hot that's on the target, it increases your healing on that target. So it's useful to have even the smallest hot on a target to keep them going. You also have Wild Growth, which is going to be one of your biggest tools in a raid setting. You target a target and then you cast Wild Growth. Untalented, it will heal. It will apply a heal over time to 5 targets. You can increase that to 6, and for raid, we will be doing so with this build. And this is probably a perfect time to cover something that came up in my Mythic Plus guide. So in the Mythic Plus guide, I went over all the importance of healing, specifically when you're running photosynthesis, and extra bonuses from like budding leaves and things like that for your Life Bloom. But there is a main focus for Life Bloom. So what is Life Bloom? Life Bloom heals over time, and when it expires or is dispelled, it blooms and heals the target, right? So if you hit this and it runs out, it will bloom and heal the target. For Mythic Plus, you want to get as much uptime on Life Bloom as you possibly can. And that's because of the budding leaves that you'd be running in Mythic Plus. I don't think Mythic Plus or raid settings, it's worth to get budding leaves, but this means that as Life Bloom heals, it gets better and better. So the baseline way to play with Life Bloom, and one thing I mentioned in the guide on the other side, was that especially if you're running photosynthesis and you have multiple Life Blooms going up on multiple targets, making sure that the Life Bloom blooms is a big part of your heal. But people in the comments pointed out something very important, which is that causing your Life Bloom to bloom, there is a safety feature built into the hot itself. This was something that was called Pandemic for Warlocks back in the day. Obviously, you wouldn't want Life Bloom to bloom every time you reapply it, because then it would just bloom and bloom and bloom. So it's important that you get to the point where it blooms, but waiting for it to expire, if you're gonna be reapplying it to the same target, that gameplay isn't as fun. So the Pandemic window is the final 30% of the duration of Life Bloom. If you refresh it within that range, it will still bloom and you'll get a new Life Bloom out of it. So specifically for tanks, or in the case of running photosynthesis, if you want to refresh the Life Bloom, you will look at the duration of it, 30% of it total, which for 15 seconds is about 4 seconds. So anything lower than 4 seconds, you can refresh it. The reason I didn't really want to touch on it in the Mythic Plus video was mainly because it's variable. So since it's a percentage of your duration on Life Bloom, if you're running things like Circle of Life and Death, which makes your Life Bloom like 12.8 seconds, and if you have a large amount of haste, it makes that duration even shorter. And so your Pandemic window can be anywhere from 2.8 to 4.5 or 5.8 seconds. So knowing exactly where that is variable. So the general rule of thumb, if you're not super cutting edge geared, is just when it hits 3 seconds, you can refresh the Life Bloom. It'll cause it to bloom, give you a big bonus heal. And it's useful in raid because your Life Bloom will almost always be on the tank when you're not running photosynthesis. So just be aware that that is there. Now, I've been messing around a lot with M+ and raid builds. And actually, recently, like 2 weeks ago, we got a pretty big buff to Luxuriant Soil. This one didn't parse that well originally, but I think it is actually super worth picking up now. I just did a Vault in the Incarnates with my Resto Druid, and it's definitely worth it. What this says is that when Rejuve heals, it has a % chance to create a new Rejuve on another target. Super useful. You also have Power of the Archdruid, which after casting Wild Growth, you'll get Power of the Archdruid, which means that your next regrowth or rejuve has a small chance to, well, small-ish, 40% chance to apply to 2 additional allies. This is huge because in Raid, the number of rejuves that you have out on other targets is a big multiplier for you when you're playing Resto Druid. So let's jump into the build, the talent build, and talk about why that is. When you are healing in Raid, your biggest contributions of HPS is going to be rejuve and wild growth. You still have tons of really good options coming out of Tranquility, especially if you're running Inner Peace, which allows you to use it more often. You can even line it up with Reforestation, allowing you to use the healing bonus you get in tree state to be able to use a bunch of value out of Tranquility. But the big reason why you want a lot of rejuves out on targets is because of abundance. For each rejuve you have active, regrowth's cost is reduced by 5%, and crit chance is increased by 5%. On top of clear casting, you can start, if you get anywhere from 8 to 12 rejuves out, which is a lot easier now with Luxuriant Soil and Power of the Archdruid, because you can triple the value of a single cast of rejuve. But once you have this out and you start getting free costs of regrowth, you get big crits, it helps you top people, it gives you more overall effective healing, and it's nice in those emergency situations balance out. So when you're in Raid, the basic gameplay is to try and manage your mana and put out rejuves that you think are going to be effective. When you're playing Resto Druid, you are not in the same state as like a Holy Priest or a Holy Paladin where you're casting to get value out of it. If you're a new healer in Raid, I would recommend just ignoring the healing charts, because if the class distribution is well balanced, if the raid is well balanced, HPS is not going to show who the best healer is. It's when you run out of mana mid-fight and you have high HPS and then you can't do anything the rest of the fight, that says a lot more about your performance as a healer than just having HPS on the top meter. So you want to get the most value out of your HOTS that you possibly can when you're playing Resto Druid. So don't just go throwing rejuves out on every single target. Put it on targets that you know are going to stay at a less than 100% value for a while and try to get good value out of that HOT. You can also pre-HOT. You can use things like Innervate, activate Innervate, throw a bunch of rejuves out, and then you can use Wild Growth after Soul of the Forest, and then use Flourish to get a huge raid-wide bonus going. But you specifically, Resto Druid is one of the best raid healers and has always been. You're very good at putting out heals on everyone. Spot healing is not your forte, though with good abundance value, you can actually get a lot out of it and get some nice regrowths. But in general, your main priority should be popping, like getting people to get lots of healing, keeping the whole raid alive, and making sure that your HOTS are always getting maximum value. You're managing it like a juggler. You're just balancing out your HOTS and keeping people alive that way. The first thing is always have Efflorescence down on either the tank or the tank plus as many people as you possibly can. In some situations, you will be able to get it on a big group, especially during big damage. But because we're running Spring Blossoms and you have the extra healing from Efflorescence, it's not going to be your biggest parse. But remember, every HOT that's on the target increases your overall effective healing. And then you're just going to be popping rejuves on people you think you're going to get good value on. Make sure you have Life Bloom on the tank. And it's even better to make sure you have Life Bloom on the tank that has aggro as well, making sure that you swap the Life Bloom when you allow it to bloom, either by letting it expire or by refreshing it inside of that pandemic window. General rule of thumb is like 3 seconds, but it could be up to 4 or 5, depending on what talents you're running. So just kind of be aware that that changes. And then you're just be looking for options to deal with that. Every time you get clear casting, which is this here, you get a regrowth for free. Don't sleep on these. It's very easy to top people up. It puts another HOT on the target, which maximizes your mastery and allows you to keep people topped the entire time. Now, cooldown wise, you have a couple cooldowns. Tranquility, especially when we're running Inner Peace, super valuable. You stand still, you throw out Tranquility, and you get some good value out of that. You're also immune to knockbacks. So there's a lot of knockbacks in Vault. that allow you to use this while there's pushback, so you can kind of get the full. The longer you channel Tranquility, the more value you get out of it. So you do want to try and finish the cast if you can. You'll figure this out as you go along. Your biggest cooldown is probably going to be Flourish. This is something we talked about in the Mythic Plus guide, but this, when activated, it instantly extends the duration of all your healer over time effects on all targets by 8 seconds and doubles the heal over time effects, like the speed of it. So they tick twice as fast, they heal much faster, and you refresh all the time. So the best way to get Flourish value is to make sure you have as many hots out that you possibly can, pre-cast things, get a bunch of hots out, and then right when people are in trouble, that's when you activate the Flourish. It's going to extend all the hots and give you that big, massive tick rate. Flourish is awesome. And the reason we end up using Convoke plus the bonus Convoke, the Convoke plus, at the start of the expansion, I thought this talent wasn't that great. What this does is it makes the cooldown of Convoke the Spirits down from 2 minutes to 1 minute, makes it a little less powerful, but it has an increased chance to use an exceptional spell or ability. It doesn't sound that great on paper. It actually, on average, sometimes you get bad RNG, but on average ends up being really, really good. So what you can do is you pop Convoke, allows you to move and use it while you're walking, but you'll end up getting things like Soul of the Forest, and more specifically, you have a chance with this improved Convoke to proc like a 3 or 4 second Flourish, which is huge. That little window of getting a bonus Flourish out of your Convoke, especially when it's a 1 minute cooldown, ends up being massive. So it's RNG, random spells flying everywhere. You can use it when you're transitioning from one place to another. Like if you have to move because of some mechanic, pop Convoke and then channel it while you're going. I wouldn't use Convoke when people are dying and it's an emergency. I would use it right before they get into that emergency. But you can get Flourish procs off this, which ends up being really, really cool. Now, some of the more subtle things about playing Resto Druid in Raid. There's 2 things we need to talk about: Soul of the Forest and Reforestation. So let's start with Soul of the Forest. This one is massive, and mastering Resto Druid in Raid can a lot of times hinge on this specific ability. So all this says is that when you Swift Mend, okay, without any bonuses like Verdant Infusion, you Swift Mend, and then your next Rejuve or Regrowth gets increased, or your next Wild Growth gets increased. So what you do is you use Swift Mend, which consumes a hot, then you get Soul of the Forest, and your next single target Rejuve or Regrowth is increased, or your Wild Growth. In most situations, you'll be using Soul of the Forest for Wild Growth. So what you do is you trigger this, you activate Swift Mend, throw out a Wild Growth, and then from there you can even Flourish on top of that, get some extra healing on top of that, make sure all the things are down, and you're letting that all tick. Super useful, super valuable. But there are situations where if you have the extra Swift Mend and you have the hot on them, you can activate it, get Soul of the Forest, and put a big Rejuve on a tank that needs it maybe, or get a big Regrowth to top somebody. But in most cases, for raid healing, you will be using Soul of the Forest for Wild Growth. So just keep that in mind, that you want to kind of line around your Swift Mend procs. You want to make sure that you're always getting really good value out of every Soul of the Forest and every Swift Mend. Which brings us to the second part of the build, Reforestation. Every 3 casts of Swift Mend grants you Tree of Life. And it's instant and you get it there. So you can see right now, like on this meter, you show that I have this marked on my Swift Mend. You can see it up here. We have 1 stack of Reforestation. We Swift Mend again. We have 2 stacks of Reforestation. And when this shows 2, my next Swift Mend will give me a free Tree of Life and transform me into Tree of Life. Why is this so good? Shapeshift in Tree of Life, increasing all healing done by 15%. You also get armor, not super important, and it grants you protection, whatever. Functionality of Rejuve, Wild Growth, Regrowth, and Entangling Roots is enhanced. But the big thing is that you get an instant cast Regrowth, which means that you can use your clear casts, you can get value out of Abundance, it makes your Rejuve better, and all your healing is increased. So, because you're always on this rotation, you're throwing out the Rejuves, you're popping people, but if you're gonna do maybe like a Convoke the Spirits, or you're gonna do a Flourish or a Tranquility, you can Swift Mend into the Tree of Life and then use your abilities, get value out of that. When you have clear casting, you throw out the bit, and every time you get that proc there, you're getting more and more value out of it, and then you can get some good usage. So a lot of getting good heals out of your raid Resto Druid is managing your Swift Mend usage. You pretty much almost always want to be using Swift Mend on cooldown, either to heal someone and top someone, get that stack of reforestation, and then get Soul of the Forest, throw out a wild growth, and keep people top that way. But it is so amazing to manage that. And I think this actually feels better than the Shadowlands version of Resto Druid, in my opinion, because you get all these nice little procs that feel good when you get them, and they feel a lot less RNG, like you absolutely need them. And that's why it's so important to have a Life Bloom on a target at all times. That's what's going to cause your clear casting state on top of the normal, and then you also get bigger regrowths coming out of it. So if you get like abundance, like sometimes like you have someone dropping, the raid's fine, but someone's dropping, you can pop this, get Soul of the Forest, you have your abundance bonus, which gives crit chance, and if you get a clear casting, you get a bonus on regrowth as well. So Soul of the Forest, regrowth, and if you have a bunch of hots on them, the regrowth is going to hit pretty hard. So it gives you that option for single target, but it does have a lot more setup than other classes. A couple things to mention in the class tree over here that are pretty important. I think for the raid build, it is nice to pick up Astral Influence. This increases the range of all your abilities by 5 yards. In big arenas like Kurog, when everyone's all over the place, it's nice to have the extra range. And another big thing that you can utilize for yourself is your well-honed instincts. You can get either 1 or 2 points in this, depending on what else you put. Most people put 2, but I was kind of playing around with some other points around here. You put this in, and then when you drop below 40% health, you get frenzied regeneration, which pops you up. Knowing when this is on cooldown versus not is actually valuable, because say, you know, there's like 5 people that need to be healed. You're one of them, and you're at 50% health, and you know well-honed instincts is ready to go. It's not on cooldown. You can let yourself fall to 40%, trigger well-honed, and then that'll heal you up to like 90% or so, or 100, depending on what procs you have at the time. So it's a nice little self-heal there. You also want to make good use of Innervate. This means that you or a healer you target will not spend any mana for the next 10 seconds. What you can do is you can target yourself, and you can just throw out rejuve, as many as you possibly can during the window. And then when that ends, then you can Soul the Forest, tree, throw out wild growth, you can throw out the flourish, and then you're just healing like absolute crazy all over the place. Super valuable, very useful, and make sure you have that. Nature's Vigil actually does a surprising amount of damage. This means that all your single target healing will do damage. It's more useful in Mythic Plus, where you can get 20 to 25k DPS out of this if you time it right. But it is something you just want to kind of keep on cooldown. The extra damage does help you out a good bit. Now, I'll also put in the description my previous build before they buffed Luxuriant Soil. This is what I was running with for Raid. Has most of the same things, but rather than Luxuriant Soil, you can mess around with Adaptive Swarm. With the Unbridled Swarm upgrade as a chance to split, you can end up getting, 6 to 10 Adaptive Swarms going at once, which not only does it have a heal over time effect, but it also increases the healing from hots on that target. It can be really, really good, especially if you're using it on cooldown and there's a lot of mobs for it to jump to, because it has to jump between enemy and friendly. But I think with the buff to Luxuriant Soil going from 1% up to 3%, I think Luxuriant Soil actually beats it out, just because it's one less thing to worry about, and it does give you a chance to triple your rejuves, which means you're proccing more things, you're getting abundance more, which makes your regrowths better. Across the board, I think that Luxuriant Soil actually beats out Adaptive Swarm now. But I'll put both those in the description. The one that I would recommend is this one here, just because I think it's the best one that exists right now. And that's how you play. So kind of, there you go. If you have any questions for me, you can find me live on twitch.tv/Drybear. Good luck in your raids. And yeah, that's it.
If you enjoyed yourself today, leave a like down below. You can support me and my work on Patreon and view Patreon exclusive content, link in the description. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.